Welcome to Between the Covers, the show for readers and writers and lovers of books. I'm Stephanie, and I'm a publisher at Red Penguin Books, where we publish books of all types and genres. So whether you have a manuscript all ready to go, a book still stuck in your head, or even 200 sheets of loose leaf shoved in a drawer, visit us at redpenguinbooks.com and unleash your inner author. I'm so excited today to be shared by three authors who have definitely unleashed themselves. J.R. Konkol is the author of Citadel of the Fallen. Rick Bobrick is the author of Bears Don't Share, Davy Crockett and the Grizzly Bear. And Amanda Montoni is the author of Bella, the Bucktooth Ballerina. But first we'll meet J.R. Konkol. And the author writes of Citadel of the Fallen. Deep within the rainforest, a group of teenage students barely survive an encounter with an ancient boar. In doing so, they stumble upon a series of events that threaten to destroy their entire civilization. The Black Tide, the annual rampage of millions of giant ants through the rainforest, has been coerced by the Demon Queen to take a path that will send it tearing through the farmlands that support the Citadel, their home. While the adults frantically race to prepare for the coming disaster, one survivor, Malcolm, experiences violent visions of the past. He learns that he's no longer alone in his own body. His revelations lead his friends to discover that many of the leaders within the Citadel are similarly possessed. Citadel of the Fallen is the exciting start of the much larger story told across the Rebirth of the Fallen series. Vivid and terrifying, but with an emotional depth that will keep readers yearning for more. J.R. Konkol weaves a complex tale with a delicate balance of cinematic action and political intrigue. Please welcome author J.R. Konkol. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Oh, thrilled to have you. And unlike most people in the world, I actually spent the summer in the Amazon rainforest. So knowing that, you're setting in ants crawling through, I can actually kind of picture that.
Yeah, it actually, I think in 10th grade, I had to read Line versus the Ants.
Ooh,
and it just stuck with me because it really happens. I mean, in the Amazon, you do have ants that pretty much tear everything up in their path as they make their annual migration.
Absolutely, they do. And, you can see the downed path of destruction that they make. Shall we say, is that what inspired this, or what made you write this?
It inspired some of it. I always played Dungeons and Dragons in my own games. And so at one point I told a bunch of my experienced players that you're playing a novel now, and we're going to play this out and see where it goes. But part of the inspiration for that was looking, in fantasy, look at Tolkien, you've got giant spiders, right? It's just a spider, it's just a lot bigger, and it scares everybody. So I considered that, what happens in the Amazon with the ants, and said, well, what happens if this is a fantasy world where they're all a couple feet long? And what would that mean, for a civilization? And it really kind of stuck with me as an interesting thing to put into that world as kind of a sword of Damocles. And it ended up being a lot of fun and really, really establishes, I think, a realistic fantasy setting.
Absolutely. And it is certainly cinematic. Does that mean that you pictured the whole thing like a movie coming in before your eyes, or how did this all evolve?
Yeah, since I played it out in a game, I had a really good idea of the timing and how everything happened. And I do multiple points of view. I switch between chapters. Game of Thrones does that. The Expanse does that really well. And so once I started getting that set of tools, underneath my hands where I could write really well with it, I figured out it's a lot like a camera. When you look at like a big Marvel movie or an action movie where you have the camera moving, well, in my case, it just moves from point of view, from character to character, but it gives you the ability to take a really huge scene and analyze it from different perspectives, to have a different piece over here, and the next chapter might be somebody else who's way over here doing something different. And it really lends itself to writing that kind of scene where it feels much bigger.
Now, you started by saying you played it out in a game. You
Yep.
got to play this whole thing out in a game first?
Yeah. In
Could you
fact,
explain that?
I saved all my game files from 2004 when I started it. And, the first like 23 chapters of the book chart on specifically for the first 23 chapters of the game. Now, of course, it takes off into different directions after that, because the novels will have a life of their own and they go in their own places. But having ran that game for my friends and my late wife for like 6 or 7 years, I have so much of a story and so huge of a world where it's made writing this, I write very, very quickly because I know where it's all going. And I know it's going to be 12 or 15 books before I've told that entire story that they played through.
12 or 15 books? Wow.
Yep. The fourth one is releasing in about 2 weeks, the very end of December, and the fifth one's releasing in August of 2023.
But you can already foresee that in order to get through the entire storyline.
Yeah. And that's if I don't let it branch off. And it's already, any writer, I used to plan everything out and I was the total planner. And as I've written more and gotten more comfortable with it, you start to realize that characters, they insert themselves and they stand up for themselves and they take things different directions. Now I still have control of that story, but now it's getting so much bigger as some of these characters have really kind of taken over. Characters who weren't supposed to be very important. Just, they've developed such a voice of their own where it's like, well, this character is going to go do this because that's what this person would do. And I'll just have to find a way to make that work.
I love that when a character who you kind of hired on as a minor player is like,
right.
Nope, I'm starring in this.
Yeah, and that's very much happened. And I really, really enjoy it. At first it's learning the craftsmanship and trying to tell the story because, with fantasy, you have so much world building where I really had to chart out, okay, how am I going to do this? Because you don't want to give you don't want to give a reader 100 pages of exposition of laying out your rules because nobody wants to read that. So you got to take your time and give it in small doses and then apply those doses. And I think we've seen a lot of fantasy worlds do that very well. I mean, Harry Potter does that very well. Gives you a really small chunk, and then next semester when they're back, it gives you something more. And by the time you're 5 books into it, you know how everything kind of works.
Right.
But you got to plan that out. But characters, they don't follow those plans.
But certainly as the author, you have to make sure that you remember what happened in book 1 and book 2, as far as the laws of physics in your world and how that affects things to make sure you're consistent.
Yeah. Since I wrote and published the game that I was playing, so I know the world very, very well and the rules of it. So, but still what you're saying is really, really important because I do have to keep meticulous notes of, okay, chapter 17 in book 2, they found this. And, here I was writing book 5 and chapter 35 of it. I'm like, oh, I've got to go use this. And I got to remember exactly how I described it, go back and look at it just to make sure it's consistent. And, and to make sure all of those details stack up.
Absolutely. Tell me a little bit more, because I'm just so fascinated. I think I've interviewed gobs and gobs of authors, including fantasy authors, and you're the first one who acted out or reenacted, or however you word it, entire storyline in the game first. And then you just mentioned that you wrote and published the game. I guess as a non-gamer, when I think of a game, I think of, Scrabble or Pac-Man. I'm
right.
really not sure what this is that you're talking about. Could you?
Sure. So I guess the easiest way to explain it is Dungeons and Dragons, because that's what everybody is seeing these days. Like Critical Role, for instance, is a YouTube series of just actual actors, playing these games and acting out their parts, and it's incredibly popular. So in these games, if you do it right, you're collaboratively writing a story. Yes, there's rules and there are dice that determine, whether you're lucky or not, and what happens with fate. But everybody participating is playing a role, and then the person running the game is the narrator, setting the world and telling the story and seeing how they interact. And it's been done before. The Dragonlance series famously did this.
Gotcha. Okay.
The Expanse actually was based off of a game. I just learned that recently, actually, interviewing Matt Forbeck. But he said, yeah, it was based off a Traveler game that they played, which is a science fiction game, which is really heavy on science. So, I mean, it happens, but you're right. It's not the most common thing in the world.
Certainly. And let me ask you, you mentioned the word collaborative, like you're playing this game and the storyline evolves collaboratively. Does that mean that what you envisioned is not necessarily like, I'm kind of confused as to how much the narrator in the game gets to impose, because when you first introduced this concept, you said you got to act out or, run this story in your game. But if there are other players, how does that work? Just curious.
Right. Okay. Well, it's a pretty easy way to explain it. Or, so in the context of Citadel the Fallen, I've got this group of friends, young adults, who are all kind of coming into their own and stumble onto what's happening to the civilization. The things that are happening to their civilization, I set in motion.
Gotcha.
I control the timeline of that. I know on day 7, this is going to happen. On day 9, this is going to happen. But how those people play out their characters with, their abilities, and how they play out their relationships. Because like 2 of the characters are brothers, and the mother died giving birth to the younger of the children. Watching those 2 individuals at the table play out that relationship and decide where they're going to take their sibling rivalry. I mean, that very much happens in the books, but that was something that those other players collaboratively put into it. They could have chose not to do that.
Right.
But they really did, and it created so many memorable scenes that I wanted to capture what they did with, with their characters acting out their parts.
Right. So now my next question is, are all these players that play this game with you, have they read the book or books?
Yes, they have. And I've tried to keep as true to their characters as possible, and anytime I have to do something where I'm like, hey, I gotta really change something here, I usually check with them. At this point, they're fine with whatever. They're kind of happy with it, but still, it's kind of nice, at least initially, when I was like, hey, I need to change your character in this way, and are you okay with that?
Right. This is like the ultimate beta readers, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, 3 of them are my beta readers, and 2 of those 3 are my most active beta readers. So that's actually really accurate.
Oh my gosh, that sounds just amazing. So you've actually played what will eventually be, 12 to 14 volumes through already. So you're kind of, I hate to say this, but almost like taking dictation, because you know what's going to happen unless your characters take control.
Right. And it's not quite that. Initially, yeah. But now as it's, so I guess a way to look at it is like, if you picture an outline, that first outline I wrote was really, really detailed. It went down to, I forget how it all works, Roman numerals, letters, capital letters, little letters. It was really fleshed out.
Yeah.
As it goes on and on, that outline becomes less and less fleshed out, where I might know the big pieces of action, but since so many other characters have stepped up and created their own space, that now I have a timeline now. I know what's going to happen 4 books down the road.
Right.
That being said, there are so many details now that are completely different, as so many other characters have taken their place on the stage and set their own things into motion.
Wow. A fascinating way to work on a storyline here. Besides writing, I don't know if you even have the time. Do you work with other writers or other writer/gamers? Because you really have a great way of explaining this.
Yeah, I do. So first, for gaming, I've been starting new games with new players to explore different areas. So like my current game is exploring areas in the city that everybody's in books 4 and 5.
Gotcha.
And we're creating, I tell them, hey, let's work on some language. I don't want to use a lot of profanity. So I said, let's make up our own words for it. So we can have profanity without, littering the novels with words that I find it unnecessary if you use a lot of it, like you might in an urban environment.
Right.
So we're exploring things like that and exploring little elements of local color to really make and environment rich, and that's kind of best done collaboratively. And then working with other writers, I am a member of a writer's workshop, and I find that immensely helpful.
Is your writer's workshop specifically, game oriented fantasy, or is it
Nope. All genres.
Really?
So I think we have 6 authors in there right now. So I submit 40 pages, they submit 20. I bought an extra spot because I needed to get through more content. I write very fast. And then it's a collaborative critiquing of everything.
Right.
And I find it really, really helpful.
Oh,
just to see how other people approach different elements and different challenges, to share how I figured out some of them, to have people point out things to me and things you got to get outside your head to find. I mean, since I do multiple points of view, I had this thing where I'd always have, let's say the character's point of view was Malcolm. Malcolm watches so-and-so do this, and I didn't know I was doing it. And people point out, we're in his point of view. You don't need to say that. Just say so-and-so did this. We know we're seeing through his eyes, but I was doing all that stuff to anchor myself, to know whose point of view I'm in.
Right.
And it's like scaffolding. But, when you build it, you think you need it. And then later when it's done, you can go through and say, hey, I don't need this, but it took somebody else to point that out to me, and it really, really quickens up the reading process when you take out all that unnecessary scaffolding.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And it tightens it up, and it's much better for the reader. So informative. I mean, really, you have such an insight into your own writing process, which is great. I always say one of the things I love about speaking with authors is not just learning more about your book, but hearing the writing process, because so many of our viewers are writers. and really diving into how you make this all work on the page. And wow, I love the collaboration there. It sounds like you have a great team of people around you.
Yep, and I hope to keep them.
Yes, let's keep them. So you said book 4 is coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Yes.
Okay, so we've got 1
Yeah.
to 3. Our viewers have just a couple of weeks to read 1 to 3.
Yeah, now they can pick up 1 to 3. There is a BookBub I don't know when this will be aired, so it probably would have happened after this is aired, actually.
Okay.
But you know what? They're on Amazon, and they're very, very affordable.
Well, anytime you
and there is a trilogy out now too, so they can just pick that up, and it's really cheap.
Fantastic. And whenever you have a promotion going on, please send it my way or share it so we could share it amongst all of our viewers.
Okay, great. Thank you.
That would be awesome. Thank you so much. Our next author today, Rick Bobrick, is the author of Bears Don't Share, Davy Crockett and the Grizzly Bear. Bears Don't Share is a fun-filled, action-packed outdoor adventure story that features a compelling competition between an iconic mountain man and his furry frenemy. Their boisterous and bruising battle for blueberries culminates in a clever and unexpected plot twist. Children will be left wondering who really won and who lost, while taking special delight in the vicarious thrill of outsmarting a grizzly bear. Please welcome author Rick Bobrick. Thanks for joining us.
How are you, Steph?
Very good, thanks. So glad to have you here today.
So happy to be here.
Well, this is a relief because, the ant swarms that were knocking down the entire rainforest. I'm thinking that while there's a grizzly bear in your book, he's not quite as terrifying.
No, not quite.
Especially not.
He does have his moments, though.
He has his moments, but fortunately the fight between Davy Crockett and the grizzly bear is for blueberries.
Yes. He is not especially cuddly, though.
Yes, but they're not fighting for world domination, so there's that.
No.
So tell me, how did this all start? What gave you the inspiration? Did you suddenly have a craving for blueberries and this whole storyline came to you?
My son Kevin is 27 years old, and when he was 2, we bought him a Davy Crockett coonskin cap. And I spent every single night reading to my kids and also making up stories. And the coonskin cap brought back memories of watching Fess Parker and Davy Crockett way back when. And I started making up Davy Crockett stories. Bears Don't Share didn't have that title way back then, but the story is, as best I could remember it, nearly identical to the story I told over and over and over again to my 3 kids. It was far and away the most requested of the Davy Crockett and the Grizzly Bear series. And I was a middle school science teacher for nearly 40 years. And when I retired, my daughter Caroline kind of begged me to try and write it as a children's book. So I was able to pull it out of my fading memory bank, mainly because I had told it so many times. I did throw in one twist that wasn't in the original story, and it's a twist that presents a bit of a moral dilemma for kids, which I kind of thought was a nice addition. But for the most part, it's the identical story that I made up way back when in 1997 or so.
Wow. So all those dads who are much more creative than just pulling something off of a shelf or pressing a button on an iPad, those stories may one day be published. That's the lesson here.
Well, it's the last thing I ever expected as a teacher and father of 3, and
not even an English teacher.
Well, I originally wrote the book as a gift for family and friends. I really didn't have any intention of publishing. Once I wrote it in the spring and early summer of 2019, I was a bit stuck for an illustrator until I realized I had an ace in the hole in the family. I had Lauren Sullivan, who's a remarkably talented young artist, and she agreed to do the illustrations, and anyone who's seen the book would readily agree just how talented she is. And in fact, she did the complete design, layout, typography. Probably the best decision I made was once I wrote it, sent her the copy, the draft, I just said, you have complete creative control, and let her take it from there. And she did a remarkable job with it.
Now, Lauren is your niece, cousin?
She's my niece.
She's your niece. So step one, when you want to write a successful children's book, is make sure you look through your relatives, because there may be some talent there.
Well, honestly, without her, I don't think I'd be sitting here talking to you in a Zoom interview right now. She really made everything possible with her talent and her, really, I'm not very tech savvy, and she did the whole thing, design, layout, had a small number of copies printed just for friends and family. And then when I saw how good it really came out, I decided to pursue possible publishing, and I got a little bit lucky, and I'm very fortunate that I did.
It is a beautiful book and an amazing story. Is there going to be more to this story?
Well, in fact, there will be 3 in total, at least for now. The count may increase from there, but right now we have Bears Don't Share, which is a physical rough and tumble competition with a sort of it's really a kind of a captivating plot twist at the end that will hook young readers or young listeners. The second book is titled Anything You Want. It's a spin-off on the 3 Wishes theme, and the overall approach there was one of trying to present a kind of a magical version of Davy Crockett and the Grizzly Bear, in which the spin-off on the 3 Wish theme is that these are 2 adversaries that end up getting 3 wishes. However, they each get 1, but now they have a 3rd wish that they have to sort of battle over to see who gets that 3rd wish. And it also breaks the 4th wall, which I'm really interested to see how Lauren will take on that challenge.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, that's we have, there's dialogue actually between reader and character, and it's sort of a back and forth dialogue at points in the book. And I in a way, I almost think that may be I'm thinking I might like it better than the first, as much as I like the first book.
I think even hearing from Jeff about the progression as one book leads to another, you get better.
Yeah, and then and the third book is titled The Scavenger Hunt, which was a spin-off of a story I made up way back when. Again, I used to do an Easter egg hunt. I couldn't for the life of me remember the punchline, which every good story needs. And I turned it into a scavenger hunt, which is a sort of a scientific search that kids get engaged with as the book progresses. And it's still Davy Crockett and the grizzly bear. And Davy Crockett finally kind of breaks down in his sort of psychological battle with the bear and helps him out on this scientific search for, I don't know, 5 or 6 different items on this scavenger hunt list. And
Fantastic.
as a science teacher, it's gonna teach kids a little bit about some science concepts at a level that even a young kid would understand the way it's presented. And the very last of the scavenger hunt items, which is sort of written as a riddle, will kind of leaves the kid hanging and the reader or the listener, and they have to figure out the final riddle, which is,
Fantastic. Well,
I
I
think,
love you keeping.
kids will find quite interesting.
Yeah, I love keeping the old Davy Crockett alive for another generation.
So do I. It's he's an historical figure, and it's nice to see him come back for a new generation, along with his furry frenemy, the grizzly bear.
I like that, the furry frenemy, the grizzly bear. Well,
Yeah.
on a completely different note, and that sounds amazing, but we're getting softer here. Our last author, Amanda Montoni, is the author of Bella, the Buck-Toothed Ballerina. And our author writes, Bella is a 6-year-old with a dream, but others think her dream will never come true because of one flaw, her buck teeth. The resident bully in class, Maddie, makes it her mission to point out Bella's buck teeth and discourages her from being a ballerina. In this story, with the encouragement of her teacher, Miss Annie, Bella quickly learns that what makes her different makes her beautiful, and better yet, is her superpower. Please welcome author Amanda Montoni. So glad to have you.
Thank you for having me, Stephanie.
Wow, so we've gone from, ants overriding the entire rainforest to a grizzly bear being a frenemy, and now ballerinas. I feel like we're
Natural
kind of
progression.
full circle here, Jeff, you could tell that there was a definite progression to authors here. I thought we'd start with and get softer. I could have done it the opposite way and had our little ballerina first and build as we went on.
This is a better way.
So tell me, Amanda, what inspired Bella? Are you a ballerina, and are you Bella?
Yes and no. I am a dance teacher. So throughout my entire life, I've been in dance classes, and in one way or another, in different capacities, different brain powers. And when I was a kid, I had buck teeth. One of them was crooked. Nobody actually bullied me in class for my buck teeth.
You look gorgeous now. So
thank you. Braces. And nobody bullied me, but as a teacher, I've seen kids and the way they interact with each other, and also just all of what society is, feeding us. And I wanted to kind of bring together my learnings from my experience in dance class, and just to say, hey, follow your dream. You're beautiful. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise. And to give kids that encouragement. Yeah. Because I know when I was a kid, I had teachers who encouraged me. And I did have things I was very insecure about. But they encouraged me, and I've somehow become a successful choreographer, and now I'm a director and all of that fun stuff. And it's because of the way that they conducted class and the belief they had in me.
Oh,
So I wanted to pay it back to the next generation.
I love that, paying it back to a teacher. Hear that, Rick? Because you're a teacher. Teachers are it. Huge impact on kids. But I took ballet when I was 3 and 4 and 5. I remember my teachers too, and what an impact they had on my life. I'm not a dancer like you, but certainly those first teachers really, really shape your whole persona. And I mean, who isn't insecure when you're in a leotard in front of a whole classroom full of people with mirrored walls? Who isn't insecure about that?
Especially when they hit the time of puberty. That's always fun too.
I can't even imagine if our 6-year-old is insecure. What about when she's 16?
Yeah. And it's amazing. I see kids. I have students that are now graduating high school. I think about, I've had them starting when they were 6 or 7. So to see them change, I've seen them change as they grow up. And I'm like, if I wanna pay it back, I gotta, do something else besides teaching. I wanna really get kids into the mindset that they are just beautiful throughout their entire lives in every way possible. And that's what this book is for.
Absolutely. Is Bella going to have any further adventures after this, or?
That is the intention. Absolutely. Absolutely. She's going to meet new friends who you wouldn't normally see in a dance class. Maddie will be up to her antics again.
Oh, yes.
And and hopefully there'll be some love for Maddie, because Maddie needs love too.
Absolutely. I love that. And I love that each one of our authors today was inspired. You were inspired in dance class, both sides of the bar, shall we say, both as,
Yes.
both as a student and as a teacher, kind of now looking and saying, here's what kids need. Jeff, a game, having this all come to life in a game, and Rick sitting there, and I could picture it with your kids on your knee. And then those stories lasted all these years. There's just so many different ways that, sometimes people will come to me and say, oh, I really, really wish I could write a book, but I have no ideas. I don't know where to get ideas. Well, here's 3 incredibly different places to get ideas from. So that's a no-go for me. People just need to open their eyes and they get ideas. But what else would you tell any prospective writers out there who want to get started? Jeff, do you have any words of wisdom for our prospective writers out there?
Yeah, it's a skill. It's an art form. And I think a lot of people get in their own way. They get in their own head and they think, I can't do this. Now if I look at the number of times I wrote the first 4 pages of this book and just threw it out and said, this is terrible, I can't do this, I never would have went on. It was just after you go on and you get 200 pages into the book, you've learned some tools. Right. You've gotten through some problems. You figured out how to write your way out of some problems. And then you just go back and you fix it. But I think so many people get lost at the beginning, expecting it to be perfect and not realizing, like anything else in life, look at dance. You weren't good when you started. There are so many skills you have to master, and you actually can't master them until you've stumbled and fall. Part of the process, is going through those steps. That's how you learn. It's how you learn in science too, for that matter. You can't expect to do the hard stuff right away. There's a process.
You're so right. People really do expect, because I work with so many authors, that their first draft was supposed to be the book. Mm-hmm. And that first draft is not the book.
I know it wasn't my book.
I'm so glad you said that, because people really, and then they berate themselves and say, I'll never do it. But it's a process. Like you said, Jeff, you can't, we all learned to ride a bike, but we all had to fall off the bike a million times first.
Right. And science is a great example. Dance is a great example. I'm a pianist, 40 years.
Wow.
You don't do anything right away. And you can't even know what you're doing wrong until you've gotten further along the path, and you just gradually get better. And that's just how it happens.
Yeah. And for whatever reason in writing, people think it's supposed to be like this
Right.
first time. I don't know why people see it differently than, like you said, learning the piano or dance or anything else that we expect there to be a process. For some reason, writing, people don't have that expectation. Rick, how about you? Some words of wisdom for our future authors out there.
It is more work than you might expect. I don't know if it's advice, but you get so deep into the weeds of a book as you write and revise and rewrite. I think it's a pretty good idea to get input and feedback from other people, because you can really kind of lose sight of where you're at any given point in a book. And I found that really helpful, even though it was a relatively short children's book. But let other people read it and see if you're headed in the right direction. Because, like I said, once you get so into it and getting very intense with it, you can kind of lose a little confidence in yourself that may be really being misplaced. So it's always a good idea to let others give your work a look, and especially the people that you know are pretty good critics.
And for the record, children's books are not easier because they're shorter. If anything, sometimes they're harder because they're shorter. You have fewer pages and words. You can't waste any. And I'm not saying that our longer novelists, are purposely wasting, but children's books are not easier because they're shorter. It's like comparing not just apples and oranges. It's like comparing apples and bicycles, really.
Yeah. I was lucky in the respect that I knew I had a good story. Getting it down into words that became an actual book was more challenging than I thought, even though I knew I had the good story.
Yeah. Amanda, how about you? Tips for our new writers out there?
If you're a new writer and you want to write a book and you're not sure what to write about, I am a big fan of free writes. I am a big fan of just writing whatever comes out. And sometimes that's really hard because, like you said, everybody expects writing to be like this. And I think that's from, as people write, they're already editing. Don't edit. Forget about the grammar. Forget about the punctuation marks. Forget about the right tense. Just write what's in your heart, in your brain, and in your soul. And it's really hard to do because you have to take a step back and submit to your feelings and your creativity, but that's how the process gets started. And then maybe a different story will form that is more than you ever expected.
No, I love that.
Ever expected it to be. Like with Bella, my first draft was completely different than what it is now. Completely different. And what got me to this book, what it is today, it was submitting to those free writes and looking at it from different angles and just letting it flow. And believing in yourself. That's the first step. You have to believe in yourself and say that you can do it. Yep. And if you can't, well, then tell yourself you can.
Fake it till you make it.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's so true. Fake it till you make it. I've faked it in dance and I've made it.
If you don't believe in yourself, fake it till you make it. You can do this. Well, as we are in the midst of, certainly the holiday season and the shopping season, I certainly want to hear from each one of you. Who should we be buying your book for today? So Amanda, please describe who on my gift list, because I haven't bought a darn thing yet. So I have a huge list and I've done nothing. So please tell me who on my list am I buying Bella, the Bucktooth Ballerina for?
Bella is a great bedtime story for those little ones, and also a good story for the elementary school age. If you have a kid who in your family or a family friend or someone you know has a kid and they like ballet or they just like the fact that she's wearing a tiara, get the book.
It's a great tiara. It's absolutely a great tiara. I get that. That's for sure. Jeff, tell us about who I should be buying Citadel of the Fallen for today.
I would say young adult and up. Citadel is very much young adult, but as the series progresses and I found what I really wanted to write and, what I was good at, it is a violent world. I keep most of the other elements, language, sexuality, I keep that all very, very well contained and largely off camera. And I think that's important because I think there's enough entries in the fantasy genre where all of that stuff is, front and center constantly. And I didn't want to do that. So it is appropriate for high schoolers. And then it certainly is appropriate for any age beyond that. Adults aren't going to find themselves, bored. And I think that's the hallmark of good novels in this, space. It's like adults enjoy Harry Potter too, even though it's a young adult story.
Fantastic. And Jeff, can I ask you about those awards I see there?
Yeah, one was a Maxi Award, which is a runner-up. And the other one's a Pencraft Award, and that was first place for fantasy and science fiction.
Fantastic. Congratulations on both.
Thank you.
Congratulations. And Rick, tell us who we should be buying a copy of Bears Don't Share. Who on my list am I buying that for?
I would say it would be ideal for age 4, possibly 3 and up, right through maybe even early middle school. Although I'm finding adults are enjoying the story almost as much as the kids. When I finished it, one of the more surprising things was I realized it was actually a little bit allegorical for the adults. And I added one sentence to make that pretty obvious. So if you're an adult reader, there's a message in there too. But and I think even younger kids, I have a lot of relatives that are buying it for much younger kids than age 3 and 4. And the pictures alone are pretty exciting, I think, for kids. And the competition is fairly easy to follow. Everyone knows what a competition is. And it made the plot twist at the end might be a little tricky for kids that are younger than 3 or 4, but I guess that's possible. But so I'm going to just say all ages who like a good rough and tumble, exciting outdoor adventure, and especially kids out in the country. I live in a rural area, and I think if you're a country kid, you'll especially enjoy this book.
Fantastic. Well, I think that our readers should all get shopping. These are 3 fabulous options. And I like what you said, Rick, about adult readers also. Certainly the best children's books are enjoyed by the adult who's reading them. If the adult is bored, they're not going to read the book. So I'm so glad that you mentioned that the adult reader.
Absolutely.
That as well. So 3 fabulous options. That should take care of most of your list we've pretty much covered. And I can't thank our authors enough for joining me here between the covers. For my authors, please, as you have different events, awards, or promotions, please share them with me so that I can share them with our audience, because we want to keep track of all of your successes. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steph.